In this video, I'm going to show you how to make these simple hoop houses that you can use to either protect your plants or to extend your season with miniature greenhouses. Hey, it's Phil from Earth Nails and Tails, and a couple days ago I was getting ready to plant out my fall garden. But I ran into a problem and I knew that I couldn't get these in the ground and actually get them to grow unless I provided them some protection. Come on, you've got to be kidding me. They ate all of the cucumbers? What am I gonna do? So I faced reality. I know that my chickens are gonna be chickens. So instead of fighting them, I'm just gonna create some simple hoop houses that I've created in the past and use them to protect my raised beds, but also it gives me the ability to extend my season because I can turn them into little greenhouses once the fall and winter rolls around. So this is something that we regularly have to do in the garden and on the homestead, turn problems into solutions. So let's get into the details of exactly how I bend these hoops and how to choose the right covers for your garden beds. So to start off, my material of choice is 10-foot long EMT conduit, and specifically I'm using a 1/2 inch diameter. They make 3/4 inch diameter as well, but it's a lot harder to bend and it's more expensive. These are about $6 a piece, so it's a really affordable and effective way to create long-lasting row covers for your garden beds. I honestly love EMT conduit, and you can see I'm using it for a variety of reasons throughout my garden. I've got the more arched conduit row covers over here. I'm using it to support my cattle panel trellis on this raised bed, and I've even got a different design for this raised bed right here. And I also have used it to create fences and gates for my chickens. So it's just a really adaptable and durable material that's gonna last a lifetime. So I wanna show you a couple different methods in order to bend the EMT conduit, because depending on what kind of tools that you have or what your skills are, you might not be able to perform both of these methods. So I'm gonna show you how to bend them in a circular fashion, like this row cover over here, or if you've got some raised beds, I got a really cool trick on how to bend them into this shape right here without pretty much any tools. So a little bit of a warning or a disclaimer before we move forward. There is going to be some math involved because we want to make sure that we're using the right amount of material in order to, one, create the right hoop size that we need, so that way it can support whatever plants that we're growing in our garden beds, and so that we can later figure out how much material we need in order to choose the right bug netting or shade cloth or greenhouse cover that we're going to apply to our hoop houses. The very first thing that I'm gonna do is actually measure the width of my garden beds, and this will work for raised beds or in-ground beds, it doesn't matter. We need to figure out how wide our garden beds are, so that way we can determine how much conduit we actually need and how to bend it in order to create our hoops. So my raised bed, my Birdies raised bed, the width is about 44 inches. So I've got a piece of paper and a pen, and I'm gonna be writing all of these numbers down and show you exactly how to calculate how much conduit we need. Might as well sit down for this part. Don't worry, it's not gonna be that bad. All right, to make this easier on myself, I always just like to draw it out. So you're gonna watch me, and I've got this looking right over my shoulder so you can see exactly what I'm drawing on here. And I'm just gonna start off by drawing my Birdies raised bed. So I'm gonna just draw a little rectangle to mock up my raised bed, and I know that it's 44 inches wide, and I also know that it's 12 inches deep. That's really important because we're gonna be sinking our conduit into the ground. So that's gonna take up some of the material, and that's just really gonna help to secure our hoop houses and make them nice and rigid and stable. So when we're thinking about how tall we want our hoop houses to be, we gotta take into consideration what plants we're growing. And I'm gonna be growing broccoli inside of my raised beds or my hoop houses. So I wanna have about 3 feet of space probably, or at least 2.5 feet of space inside of my hoop. So from the top of my raised bed to the bottom of the hoop, I want it to be about 3 feet. So that's what I'm gonna write down. I'm gonna start with 3 feet, or that's 36 inches. So when we are creating our hoop houses here, we're actually creating a half circle. And when you're creating a circle or trying to figure out the dimensions of a circle, you need to know the radius. And we actually know the width of our garden bed. So if we take our width and divide it by 2, we have what is our radius. So in this situation, it is 22 inches. So if you want to pause the video right now and go measure the raised beds or the garden beds that you want to use this for. Go out and get your dimensions so that way we can work through this together. And when you're ready, just come back and start the video again. All right, so you're back. So once you have the width of your garden bed, we're gonna divide that in half in order to get the radius. Because what we're gonna do is actually create this semicircle shape here. And essentially create a half circle with a little bit of pieces, vertical pieces that are going down to meet the top of our raised beds, and then an additional material that's going to sink down into the soil. So we need to take all of this into consideration. So since I know my raised beds are 12 inches deep, my conduit is gonna sink down into the raised bed 12 inches. So we've got 12 inches on one side, we also have 12 inches on the other. So we've got that taken care of. Now I know the radius of my arch is 22 inches. So the physical arch, the tallest that it will be is 22 inches because it doesn't matter where you measure it from. This arch height is never gonna change. So I know that arch is gonna add 22 inches to my overall height. Since I want the total space inside of my hoop to be 3 feet, I need to do 36 inches, which is 3 feet. And I know the max height of my arch is 22 inches. So if I subtract 36 minus 22, that gives me 14. That means I need to add an additional 14 inches of height from the top of my raised bed to where the arch begins in order to get that full 3-foot spacing inside of my hoop houses. And if you're watching the math, this is probably gonna make more sense. So I need to add 14 inches on both sides. So these vertical pieces need to be 14 inches. So we've got 12 and 12 for the height of my raised bed. Then we're gonna add 14 and 14. And last but not least, we need to figure out how much material we need to use to actually create that arch. And if you don't remember this from grade school, the calculation to determine the circumference of a circle, which would be the material that we need in order to make that arch, is 2 pi r. But since we don't need to create a whole circle, we're only creating a half of circle, we can get rid of this number 2. So we just have to do pi times our radius. And we know in this example, our radius is 22 inches. So pi is 3.14 times 22. And just to make the math simple, it doesn't need to be perfect. We're just gonna do 22 times 3, which gives us 66. So now I'm gonna add up all of these numbers together. 12 plus 12 is 24. 14 plus 14 is 28. So 28 plus 24, 12, 4, 5, 52. And then 52 plus 66 is 118. So I like to always turn it from inches into feet. So 118 divided by 12 equals about 9.8 feet. So what a coincidence, actually. Our conduit comes in 10-foot sections, so I'm not even going to cut my conduit. I'm just gonna leave it as is and use that for my raised beds. But just know, you can create smaller hoops like you have right here, or you can create taller hoops like I have back there. Just know that this is the method that you want to use in order to determine how long your single piece of conduit needs to be in order to create the perfect semicircle arch and be tall enough in order to support the plants that you plan on growing in your hoop houses. So I hope I didn't completely lose you there, but it's really important to know because now you could just take this and you can apply it to any raised bed. Like I've already done the calculation for my Birdies raised beds, so I know exactly what I need to do in order to create a hoop house like that. But I also have some other raised beds which are only 30 inches wide, and I can apply this exact same methodology and calculations in order to determine how tall and how wide my hoop house needs to be in order to fit my plants. I'm gonna do the exact same thing for my 30-inch raised beds because my chickens, they love to scratch and dig, and I've seen them in there and they've already torn out a large portion of my carrot crops, so I need to provide protection for those raised beds as well. So now that we know we need a 10-foot piece of conduit in order to make this arch for our Birdies raised bed, I'm gonna show you a really cool method on how to easily bend this pipe. And if you've got a raised bed, a corrugated raised bed like this, you're gonna be mind blown by the sack. It's actually really useful and really simple and requires essentially no tools. So to ensure that I'm gonna make an arch that has equal material on both sides, what I'm gonna do is find the middle of my piece of conduit right here. So since I'm using a 10-foot piece, I need a 10-foot piece. I'm just gonna measure out and mark 5 foot right in the center of this piece of conduit. I'm also gonna take a pencil and make a mark on my raised bed so that way I know where the center is. So again, we're gonna just measure the width and transfer that down. So 44 inches, 44 again, divided by 2 is 22. So I'm just gonna make an approximate mark around 22 inches right there in my raised bed. So now what I'm gonna do is take my conduit and line up the line that I made on my piece of conduit here with the line that I have on my raised bed. So when I bend these pieces, I know that the center point will be the exact same, and the amount of material I have on the right and the left of my hoops will be really, really similar. So what I'm gonna do is line up my lines here on my raised bed, and I'm actually just going to clamp this right into my raised bed. And I just fit this piece of conduit right into one of the corrugations of my raised bed right here. So we're just gonna clamp that and make sure it's on the inside of these little arches right here. Because what we're gonna do is just take our conduit, now that it's clamped down and it's really stable, and we're just gonna bend this, and look how easy that is. It just bends right along that rounded portion of the raised bed. And I would do it on this side as well, but my raised beds are too close together, so I'm actually gonna have to just unclamp these, flip this piece over, but you notice that bend there. Look at that, how easy that was. And we're gonna do the exact same thing again. Just make sure that you are kind of floating this one piece up, so that way you're not bending this one in like upward direction. You want them both to be bent in the same direction. So I'm just gonna put this back, get a little creative here with how I'm gonna hold this up. Whatever works, right? Just slightly tighten that one so I can make sure that it's on the line. Make sure that this one is flat. Get that nice and tight. And we're gonna do the exact same thing. We're just gonna bend this like that. And that's it. Like with 2 clamps, and honestly, if you're gardening or homesteading, clamps are an essential. So just invest a couple bucks. Obviously it's more than a couple dollars, but I could put the link into the ones I'm using down in the description below. But invest into some clamps, they're so useful. But now we've got this shape here, which almost resembles this arch. We just have to do one more thing. So to just give this piece a little bit of a point, like we have on this one right here, you could leave it flat if you wanted to, but especially if you're gonna use these for miniature greenhouses, I think you want to slide a slight point on it, so that way if it snows or if it rains, that snow or water can easily shed off. If you just leave it flat, it's gonna put a lot of pressure onto whatever material that you're actually using to create your greenhouse or your row cover. So what I like to do is just put my foot in the approximate middle and just, or even 2 feet if you want to get like a wider arch, and just really slightly like pull up. You can see it start to bend. It doesn't take a lot. And then there's our hoop. Just like that. Really simple method, really simple and effective. Now we're just gonna stick this right in a raised bed. So now we could just take this, and if it doesn't quite meet the width of your raised bed, you could just pull it in a little bit more, but mine works good. And now we could just get it in the approximate position that we want, press down, and just like that, we've got our hoops. So a little bit of math and a couple pieces of EMT conduit and a couple clamps later, and we've got our hoops ready to support our bug netting, our shade cloth, or even our greenhouse covers. But let's say you don't have a corrugated metal raised bed, or you want to have more of that circular shape. What can we do in order to create those hoop houses? So if you want to create perfect semicircular hoops like this, or as I said, you don't have a corrugated raised bed that you can easily bend the conduit around, like I have some wooden raised beds back here that I want to create these hoops for, you can either one, get a pipe bender, and you know, those can range in price from anywhere from $30 to $100. I personally don't have one of those, and I also like to make things. So what I decided to do was create a pipe bending jig that I custom created to fit my raised beds. So I actually made this jig a few years ago for my Birdies raised beds, and it has worked out great. It gets that nice semicircle shape, it's beautiful, and it also gives you a little bit more room than if you were to use that kind of like flat roof section. I would actually recommend using more of a circular shape, especially if you get heavy snows in the winter, because the snow is just going to shed off of that rounded shape much easier. So if you don't want to invest the money on a pipe bender and you've got some scrap wood lying around, this is definitely a fantastic option, and I'm going to show you exactly how to make one right now. So these are the raised beds that I'm going to be creating the new jig for, and both of these are about 30 inches wide. In one, I'm going to be planting a row of broccoli, followed by leeks and beets, and the other one, I'm going to be growing carrots and spinach. So this is going to be great to protect those like we talked about before. So I know that my diameter is 30 inches wide, which means that my radius is 15 inches, and that's the only number that we need in order to create this jig. So if you want to create that perfectly arched shape, again, pause the video, go measure that raised bed or that in-ground bed that you want to create these arches for, and go measure the width, divide it by 2, and get your radius. So the first thing that I need to do is create a template for my jig. And what I'm going to do is basically make a quarter of a circle. I'm going to cut it out, and then I'm going to use that to cut the pieces of wood that I need in order to create my jig. So since I know that the radius of my semicircle, or the radius of my circle, is 15 inches, I'm going to, of course I forgot my tape measure. There we go. I'm going to measure out a 15-inch piece of string right here. Give yourself a little bit more. So I'm going to go about 17 inches here, like that. Now what I'm going to do is tie it around my pencil. This is why I gave myself a little bit extra length. Now we really want to make sure that our measurement is accurate. So yeah, that's good right there, about 15 inches. Again, this doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. We just want to get it as close as possible. So now I'm going to take my thumb right here, and I'm going to put that right in the corner of what I'm going to use for the jig, and take a second and find a good corner. This one over here looks like the best. It's like the best for me. So now I'm just going to take my pencil, and notice I'm going to be able to create a circle with this, because my pivot point is staying the same, and I'll get a nice consistent arch on here, just like that. I'm just going to do this a few times just to make sure that it's nice and solid, and that looks good. So now I have, and I can even check it, now I have a circle right here that has a radius of 15 inches. So that's perfect right there. Now that I've got that, I'm just going to cut it out. And of course, I don't need to cut through this whole thing. All right, so there's my template. Nice piece of pizza pie. So I've actually got a scrap piece of plywood from my garage that I have left over from another project, and I'm just going to use this in order to transfer my template, and then I'm going to cut it out to create our jig. But what you need to do is make sure that this piece right here is either as thick or almost as thick as your piece of conduit, or thicker. Because if it's not thick enough, when you go to bend the conduit around it, it could actually slip off, and you're gonna have a really hard time you're bending your piece of metal. So when you're choosing a piece of scrap wood, or if you're gonna make a jig when you go to the store to pick out materials, make sure it is at least a 1/2 inch thick, So it makes it really easy to actually use the jig. You want this to be a simple process when it's done. So I know that I have the right piece of material right here. So what I'm gonna do is just take my pizza pie, put it on top of my piece of wood right here, line it up with the corner, and we're just gonna trace it out to transfer that onto the piece of wood, just like that. So now that my pizza pie is all drawn on here, we gotta cut it out. Oh, this is where the nails of Earth Nails and Tails comes in. I'm gonna be using a jigsaw in order to cut out this piece of wood. And if you don't have a jigsaw, you can use a handsaw as well. But for me, building all of these projects that I have here on the homestead, tools are something that I've just slowly accumulated. And if this is something that you want to continuously do, I highly recommend that you invest in some tools as well. It just makes doing these jobs obviously a lot easier. You can also ask a friend, but it's just nice to be able to slowly get these tools that you need in order to build the life that you want to live. And you also learn some skills along the way, so that way you can continue to do even more for yourself and also help out your friends. So before I start, safety first. There we go. What I'm also gonna need is a little piece of blocking in order to just provide some leverage against that conduit when we bend it. So with this scrap piece of wood, I'm just gonna cut a straight line right across here, and then we can finally assemble the whole jig together. That's all we need. So to physically assemble the jig, I'm just gonna apply it on top of the existing jig that I have, so that way I can use this larger piece in order to bend conduit for my larger raised beds, and then I also have this smaller piece that I can use for my smaller raised bed. So I'm just positioning this on here so I can attach it to the board. So I'm just gonna use some screws and a drill and just start sinking these in here just to really secure it into place. It really doesn't have to be pretty, as long as it's secure. All right, that should be plenty. Now, I had us cut out this additional blocking here. What I want to do is place this right at the corner, so that way I can fit my piece of conduit into here like this. I don't want to leave too much of a gap though. I want this to be nice and tight. So just basically butt it up to the conduit so that way you can easily move it through here like that. And that's a good spot. So now I'm going to attach this piece of blocking to this as well. There. And then just one more right here. And our jig is done. So now what I can do is grab a piece of conduit and show you how it works. All right, so the whole reason why I made this jig was to create hoops for my smaller raised bed. So I've got this jig right here for my larger Birdies raised beds, and then I've got this jig for my smaller wooden raised beds. So I calculated from the math that we did earlier that I needed a piece of conduit that was 8 feet long. So what I did was marked the center, and I put a little line right here. I'm gonna put that line right on this corner right here, because what we've got is a quarter circle. So I'm gonna bend it down this way, flip it over, bend it the other way, and then we'll have that half circle shape. So I'm gonna put this right here, right on that line, and then it's really pretty simple. Just bend it along here, like this. And you might wanna get a hand, someone to stand on this, makes it a little bit easier just to give pressure, or put your foot here. And we're just gonna bend this just like that. All right, so we've got the half done. And then I just flip this over, line this up on my line again right here. If you've got a really tight jig, you'll get this half semicircle shape. And if you notice, ideally I want this to be perfectly flat like this. So I can move this over a little bit so that way the pipe isn't moving as much. And as you can see, I've got like this little flat portion up here since it was kind of angled a little bit. So what I'm gonna do to finish off of this piece is just put my foot in the middle and then bend it together just like that. And there's our half circle shape. Comes out pretty nice. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be functional. So what this jig does is ensures that I have my semicircle, my half circle shape, that's gonna be a certain width, which is gonna be the width of our raised bed. And then I also have these vertical portions that go up and down, which actually adds to the height of my hoops. So that way I can have the distance that I need inside of the row cover like we were talking about when we did the calculations. So this is like proof of concept. This is where everything comes together and it all makes sense. So now let's go install it. So the whole point of us making these hoops was to install some sort of protection, like I have my bug netting, or in this case, my chicken netting here. Or you can use a shade cloth for the hotter parts of the year, or you can throw over a plastic cover to make a miniature greenhouse. What you need to understand is what size material that you need to get. So if you're using a bug netting or a piece of plastic to make a miniature greenhouse, you're gonna want the material to flow all the way over, both on the sides and the front and the back. Versus if you're using a row cover, you really only need it to cover the top. So in order to determine the size of material that you need, we have to measure the width as well as the height and the length of the final setup here. So what I'm gonna start out by doing is measuring from the ground where the bottom of my bug netting is resting to the top of the hoop, which is about 4 feet. So I got 4 feet coming up here, then measuring across, I've got about 6 feet, so that's 10 foot total. And then the other side should be the same thing, be another 4 feet. So I need about 14 feet of material lengthwise to cover this raised bed. Now additionally, I need to figure out how much material I need to go this way, since we've got 2 dimensions to the amount of material that we need. So again, I'm measuring up here, and this is gonna be a little bit harder because we've got that curved shape now. So I'm just gonna do this approximately, because again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can always get a little bit bigger of a material than you need, because most of this stuff is gonna come standard size anyway. So I've got about 5 foot to the center here, which means that I need something that is 10 foot to cover the whole side. Since I'm going up one side and it's 5 foot to the center, 5 plus 5 is gonna be 10 foot. So that means I need a piece of bug netting that is about 15 or 16 feet long and 10 feet wide. So this is what you could do for every single situation. Obviously, if you have row covers that are shorter, you're not going to need as large of a piece, but it's really important to understand how to figure this out so that way you can get a piece of material that's large enough and you don't have to keep going back online on Amazon or to the big box stores to get a piece of material that's going to fit it right. And you can get all fancy with how you're actually getting your row cover to attach to your hoops here or to your raised beds. But me, I like to keep it really simple. A good old 60-cent brick, a paver, and I just bunch up my bug netting here and just lay the brick right on top, and it seems to do the job. So it doesn't have to be super complicated in order to get a really effective result. But I'm happy because now that I know that my plants are protected, I can get my fall plants in the ground and we can start having some amazing successes this fall and even into winter, because very soon I'm gonna be swapping these out for some plastic greenhouse covers, which is easily going to extend our season anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks into the winter. But also as spring starts to roll around, I can keep those on and start planting even earlier. When I first made a video a couple years ago on how to make these simple and effective row covers, I got a lot of questions on how to bend these hoops and how to physically form them to your raised beds or your garden beds. And I really hope that this video simplified everything and gave you a couple methods that you could apply. Depending on your skills or your situation, you now have a way that you can actually create these simple, affordable, durable, and effective row covers for your garden. If you like this video, please make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel. It means a lot. And I'm now out here in the rain doing this all for my love of gardening and to help you grow the gardener in you. So if you want to continue to see more of our awesome videos and level up your gardening game, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us grow and it will help you grow too.